The Haunted Mansion. It was a crisp autumn evening when I first saw the mansion. Its silhouette loomed over the horizon, a dark, imposing structure against a backdrop of swirling clouds. I had heard stories of the place, like many others in the town. The locals whispered about it in hushed tones, always avoiding it as if it were some kind of curse. But I wasn't one to be scared by rumors. I was an investigator, a writer of the strange and the unexplained, and the Haunted Mansion was the perfect subject for my next article. Little did I know that stepping into that mansion would change my life forever. The town of Brimstone Hollow was small, tucked away in the mountains where few ventured. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. Most people didn't speak much to outsiders, but the few I managed to talk to warned me about the mansion. They told me of strange noises, figures in the windows, and the occasional sighting of lights flickering on and off late at night. They said the house had been abandoned for decades. But it wasn't just the structure that was abandoned. It was the spirits of the family that had lived there. No one could confirm exactly what happened to the mansion's previous owners. Some said they had died mysteriously in a fire, while others claimed that a terrible tragedy had befallen them. There were whispers of madness, of cruel deeds, and of a curse that had plagued them for generations. The people of Brimstone Hollow were superstitious, and their fear of the mansion had turned into a deep-rooted belief that it was best left alone. I wasn't afraid. I had investigated haunted places before. In fact, I prided myself on my ability to keep a cool head and to uncover the truth behind these eerie tales. So, when I arrived at the mansion's gates, I was filled with a sense of excitement rather than fear. The iron gates were rusted and overgrown with ivy, creaking as I pushed them open. A winding path led up to the mansion's front door, framed by a pair of tall stone pillars. The mansion itself was enormous, its once white facade now stained with age and neglect. Its windows were dark, like empty eyes staring out at the world. I took a deep breath and walked up to the door. My heart pounded with anticipation. I had no idea what I would find inside, but I was determined to uncover the truth. As I reached for the doorknob, a gust of wind swept through the trees behind me, sending a chill down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, but then I pushed the door open. The inside of the mansion was like something out of a nightmare. The air was thick with dust, and the scent of decay hung in the air. The walls were adorned with faded wallpaper, the once grand chandeliers now broken and covered in cobwebs. The floor creaked beneath my feet as I stepped into the entryway, and the sound echoed through the vast, empty halls. It was strangely quiet, too quiet, almost as if the house were holding its breath. I made my way through the mansion, my footsteps disturbing the thick layer of dust that covered everything. The rooms were filled with old furniture, some of it still covered in tattered sheets, others left in disarray as if the residents had simply vanished without a trace. The deeper I went into the mansion, the colder it became. The temperature dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath in the air, even though the night was warm outside. Then, as I wandered through the hallway, I heard it, a faint sound coming from upstairs. A soft, almost imperceptible creaking, like the sound of footsteps. My pulse quickened. I wasn't alone. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again. It was definitely the sound of someone walking. I slowly made my way up the grand staircase, my hand gripping the railing for support. As I reached the top, I noticed that the air grew heavier, thick with an almost oppressive energy. The hallway stretched before me, dark and endless. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, but I pressed on. The sound of footsteps continued, but they seemed to be getting closer. I turned a corner and found myself standing before a set of double doors, slightly ajar. Without thinking, I pushed the doors open. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. The room was a grand bedroom, or at least it had once been. The four-poster bed was draped with tattered curtains, and the floor was scattered with old, broken furniture. But what caught my attention was the figure standing by the window. A woman dressed in a long, flowing gown, her back to me. Her hair was dark, cascading down her back in waves, but it was her face that made my heart stop. Her skin was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes were wide and empty, staring out into the void. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The woman turned slowly, and I could see now that her face was not just pale, it was distorted, twisted, like a mask of agony. Her lips moved, but no sound came from her mouth. Instead, I heard a voice in my mind, soft and whispering, like a distant memory I couldn't quite reach. Leave this place, or suffer like the rest. I staggered backward, my heart racing in my chest. I turned to run, but as I did, the woman's hand reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was cold, so cold that it burned through my skin. I gasped, struggling to free myself. But her hand only tightened, pulling me toward her. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, she vanished. I stood there in the dark room, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The air felt heavy with an unnatural presence, and I knew without a doubt that I was not alone in this mansion. The spirits of the former residents were still here, trapped in some kind of twisted purgatory, unable or unwilling to leave. I bolted from the room, running down the hallway, desperate to escape. But every time I tried to make my way to the front door, it felt as if the mansion was shifting, warping around me. The walls seemed to close in, the hallways stretching on forever. I was lost, trapped in a labyrinth of my own fear. The whispers began again, louder this time, coming from all directions. They were the voices of the dead, the voices of those who had lived and died within these walls. They spoke of pain, regret, and sorrow, their words a constant barrage in my mind. "You shouldn't have come," one voice murmured, its tone filled with malice. "The mansion doesn't let anyone leave," another whispered, barely audible above the others. I stumbled through the darkness, my mind reeling. I had to get out. I had to escape before I, too, became one of the spirits, doomed to haunt this place forever. But no matter where I turned, I couldn't find the door. It was as if the mansion had swallowed it whole, leaving me trapped in its suffocating grip. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath in the air. A cold wind began to swirl around me, carrying with it the scent of death. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as though the spirits were closing in on me, eager to claim another soul. I could hear footsteps behind me, but when I turned, there was no one there. Only shadows that seemed to move on their own, creeping along the walls. I ran faster, my heart pounding in my chest, until I could no longer feel my legs. I was exhausted, terrified, and on the verge of collapse. But just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I saw it, the front door. It was standing wide open, the light of the moon spilling in, beckoning me to freedom. I stumbled toward it, but as I reached for the handle, something pulled me back. A hand, icy cold, wrapped around my wrist once more, and I screamed in terror. I turned to see the woman from before, her face twisted in agony, her eyes hollow with despair. "You're not leaving," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow and rage. "None of us ever leave." And then, with a force I couldn't fight, she dragged me back into the darkness. The mansion is still there, standing as it always has, its windows dark and empty. But now, when I pass by, I can't help but feel its pull. The spirits of the former residents still haunt it, and I know now that the mansion will never let go of those who enter. It feeds on fear, on desperation, on the hopelessness of those who are trapped within its walls. If you ever find yourself in Brimstone Hollow, do not go near the mansion. Do not listen to the whispers of the dead, for once you step inside, you may never leave.